So we're going to look at, so does anybody know what physiology is?
Study how you look.
The study of
Body.
function. Physiology is function. So anatomy and physiology, anatomy is the structure, physiology is the function. So physiology is the study of the function and genetics of animal behavior. So we're looking at the function and the genetic impact that it has on function in animal behavior. And this is all going to be regulated by the environment. So we're going to start off early in life, and we're going to talk about some different forms of conditioning, and then we'll move into how hormones impact. So big picture, when we talk about behaviors, you can divide behaviors into two groups, instinctive and learned. Instinctive behaviors in general are ones that you are born with, okay? And learned behaviors are ones that you receive feedback on as you continue to age and grow and experience, and you develop those or tweak those as you age. Your behavioral repertoire is overall how do you act in response to different stimuli. And for most of you, it should still be developing, like as in that you haven't experienced everything that you could potentially experience. Do you act the same way in different situations? It just depends. And that's what this is referencing. So how you act in different environmental situations. When we study animal behavior, we're trying to study predictable behaviors. So when we study that, we want to see when we put this animal in this situation or in this environment and we do it over and over again, do they act the same way? Is this something predictable or is it something random? So when we're studying physiology, we're studying the function. We're looking for predictable patterns or predictable responses. And many of them, I feel like I'm overcomplicating it, but many of them are really simple. Like a lot of times when you hear a loud sound, you cover your ears or you crouch, or those are just part of those behaviors. Ethology. Ethology is how do animals respond or behave in their natural environment. So in their habitat, interacting with their peers, with the superiors, with those inferior to them, if they have a hierarchical structure, how they interact in a natural environment. And neuroscience takes us into anatomy, which of course I absolutely love, but we're going to study, and not necessarily you and I today, but we study how the structure of a neuron impacts its function. Because in 1406, what did I tell you about cells? Structure or form determines function, right? And so that's what it's saying there, where we study the anatomy and then understand the physiology as when within the development of the nervous system and how that impacts your behaviors as you age and grow. So instinctive behavior, as you already mentioned, is that you are born with. So as soon as the first time you use it, it's completely developed, ready for use, right out the chute. So examples of instinctive behavior would be like for a full-term baby, so a baby who was not born premature, they have a natural suckling response. So they naturally know how to eat already, okay? The issue with preterm babies or premature babies is that they haven't developed the nerves or that instinct just yet, so we have to teach them. It becomes a learned behavior for them, which is why premature babies, they struggle initially in life. But so instinctive, you just know to do it. We'll also learn like predatory reactions and stuff like that. Certain things like that will be listed as instinctive. Learned behavior is something that you develop as you experience things. And like a really good example of this for humans is putting your hand on like a stove or in a light socket. Do small children know the impact of that? No. And even though you tell them, no, because you already know the consequence of coming into contact with that burner or that socket, they don't. And what's the only way that they're truly going to understand the impact? If they experience it. And of course that hurts you, but I bet they don't do it again. Okay? Learned behavior has a lot to do with social feedback as well. Whenever you act a certain way, and if the people around you, or there are some negative consequences associated with that, tell you, hey, that's not acceptable, you tend to modify your learned behaviors. Or if someone says, oh, that's really awesome, then you continue to do it in the way that you were doing it. It mentions here that many instinctive behaviors are highly stereotyped, which that's like when we're talking about the suckling, people mostly know what your natural instinctive behaviors are. But what's the main difference between the way organisms act instinctively? It's in that sentence. Genetics, what does that mean? And it's in their DNA. It's in their DNA. And the one thing we know about DNA is that we all have it because we're all living organisms, but is it always identical? The only time it's identical is if you have an identical twin because you were once one kid, right? So we might have a very similar DNA. We might have the same parents, but we may act different, okay? And our genes may be expressed differently. So there may be some genetic differences in the way organisms act or behave. Fixed action patterns are highly stereotyped, meaning we know what's going to happen. We know if we have this stimulus, that this is going to be the response to that stimulus. We can also modify that by experience. So if I want to change it, I can do it over and over and over again, and that's when we're going to get into that conditioning thing. You can do it over and over and over again, and I can teach you to act a different way. There is a genetic basis for that. For example, and a fixed action pattern, if I'm walking and someone comes up behind me and grabs my hand, what is the first thing that I'm going to do? You're going to yank, like it's just what you do, okay? It's just your response. And in fact, we call that the flexion, extension, or reflex, but you don't have to know that. That if I'm just walking and somebody catches me off guard and tries to grab for my hand and they do that, my instinct is to pull it away. It's a protective instinct. But if that happens over and over again, like for those of you parents and your kid is walking behind you and they grab your hand, what do you tend to learn to do? Yeah, like grab onto it. Because they're trying to tell me, hey, will you lead me through this or something like that, or I'm scared right now. So you learn. Even though those moves are highly stereotyped, we can, based on experience and the things that we learn within our environment, we can modify those. Okay, so that's just an example of a baby smiling and laughing because they're having fun. Okay, learned behavior. So I feel like you know that learning is a process. And there's feedback on that. But imprinting is what you learn during a very impressionable time in your life. And when's the most impressionable time in your life? As a child, an infant. And most of the studies, and the one that will be showed here, is with ducks. We can imprint on these ducklings because they imprint on whatever they come into contact with first. And they imprint whatever that is, whether it be the mother duck or a human or a dog, whatever it is, they associate that with their caregiver, the individual who's responsible for taking care of them. Okay? If you are a human and you have a child in the hospital, after they clean the child off, what is the first thing that they do? Give it to the mom. And now they've even stopped with the whole cleaning them off first, and they do skin-to-skin contact, which means that as soon as the child is born and they cut the umbilical cord, they don't wrap the child or anything. They hand it straight to the mother, and they put the baby on her skin, not on her clothes or on a blanket. They put the baby on her skin to imprint immediately, like this is my mom, or this is my caregiver. Like that is part of what we do in hospitals now. Like that's the practice. Where it used to be you would clean the baby up and then take it to the mom, which still works. But now we do that skin-to-skin contact, and it's usually for 4 to 5 minutes that they allow that child to lay there and the mother to hold them, and then they take the baby and clean it, okay, and get it ready for all its testing and so on. Classical conditioning, and for those of you who have studied like psychology, I say in high school, a lot of you are in high school, but there's Pavlov's experiment. Pavlov's experiment in classical conditioning says that you hear some type, or you come into contact with some type of stimulus And the first time you come into contact with it, it's not familiar to you. And there's a response that stimulus is trying to solicit. So in the example for Pavlov's, he rings a bell, and then he gives the dog a treat. And then the next day, he rings a bell, and he gives the dog a treat. The next day, he rings a bell, and he gives the dog a treat. The next day, when he rings the bell, the dog is sitting there. Why? He's waiting for the treat. He knows when I hear that bell, I'm going to get a treat. That's what he knows. Okay? So what they do is they repeat this over and over again. Pavlov repeats this over and over again. And he rings the bell, but he doesn't give the dog a treat. The dog is expecting a treat. When you're getting ready to eat, can you tell me what you do physiologically? You start to salivate. When you know you're about to eat something, especially when it's something good, like you're like, oh, it's a protein shaker. Oh, I'm about to have to scarf this down. But like if it was a nice, good dinner or meal or lunch and you were really excited about it, as soon as you start thinking about it, you're like, you'll start swallowing. Then that'll cause your stomach to growl as you get hungrier because you're putting fluids down there and it's thinking that you're eating. But so that's what they did. They classically conditioned this dog. They ring the bell, gave it a treat. Ring the bell, gave it a treat. Ring the bell, no treat, but the dog's still salivating because it's been conditioned that every time I hear that bell, I know I'm going to get a treat. So that was a learned behavior. Classical conditioning, there's lots of examples of classical conditioning. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning says that you are stimulated for some reason and you learn how to respond to that stimulus. So the example for this, and I forget the guy who did this. It wasn't Pavlov, it was Skinner. He had mice and they would get hungry, but he had like a colored button inside their cage, and when they pushed the button, the green button, food would come out. And did they know that? No. So what happens is they get hungry and they're kind of flailing around their cage, and food is not there. So they're like, I'm trying to eat. I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. And somebody accidentally hits that button and food comes out. So everybody eats, right? And then they're, okay, cool. Well, then they get hungry again and they start flailing around and somebody accidentally hits that button. And then what do they all start to realize? When I hit this button, food comes out. So they were stimulated on their own for some need that they had. And as they explored, they figured out, oh, well, when I do this, I'm rewarded. So they had to actually carry out an operation. Like they had to learn on their own. It wasn't like Pavlov's where we rang the bell and gave them a treat. This organism had to come across it on their own. And when they did realize it, they conditioned themselves. When I'm hungry, if I push this green button, food comes out. Okay, so that's the difference there. Habituation is where you become accustomed, or accustomed is not the word, but you become unaffected by a stimulus that continues to occur. In anatomy, one of my favorite examples for this is perception versus sensation. Some of you, especially when you have kids, and you may be this kid, but your parents are driving and you are fighting with your siblings in the back. And if you're in my vehicle and I'm driving and you're my kid and you're in the back and you're arguing, I honestly don't know. Because I've just like, that's it. Like I'm in my own zone. They're there fighting. You know, they might, I don't know until somebody like grabs me and says, Mom, she hit me in the face or something, you know, random like that probably does occur. But when my husband gets in my truck on the weekends, like when we roll out to tournaments, and they start fighting, he's like, can y'all stop? Like, how do you drive? How do you keep going when you know? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, it bothers me none. I've just become accustomed to it, and I know that there's no threat in their fighting, that that's just what they do. Even if I've said, if you keep fighting, y'all are going to walk home. You know, they're quiet for a while, and then I've just become habituated to it. Like it doesn't bother me. Okay. Another example is whenever you learn people's voices, and this is where perception comes in. I'll be walking down the hallway. This really happened in high school. It doesn't really happen here because the hallways were so packed. But you know how there's always that one student that you like know their voice, and you're like, oh. So I would hear them say, G, G, and I knew it was them, so I'd just be like, everybody's talking around me, and I can hear that one voice, and I already know I'm not trying. So perception versus sensation, and that's what takes it into anatomy. But when I don't have to listen to my kids fight, and I don't have to threaten because I've just kind of tuned them out, less stress for me. My husband still freaks out, and that drives me nuts, but whatever. So this is imprinting, and this is showing Conrad Lorenz how he had these ducks, and he took them out there, and they imprinted on him, so they thought of him as their parental figure. They followed him. They mimicked him. They did what he did, not their own mother. And science has proven that over and over again, the impressionable age where imprinting occurs. So here's just a diagram out of the text that shows each, and then it gives a description. So it kind of summarizes it all together there. Any questions on these learned behaviors / kind of instinctive when we talk about imprint? Okay, neurophysiological control of behavior. Neurophysiological control of behavior. What are we talking about? Neuro, brain, physiological, function. So there are 4 circuits, brain circuits. You don't have to know that, nerve circuits. But they have specific pathways and specific ways that they carry out their assigned task. Guess what determines their pathway and their assigned task? All the way. Like you cannot go wrong with that old DNA there. DNA. Okay? Now, it mentions there the activation of specific genes fosters the development of nuclei that regulate a bird's song. When you see this term here, nuclei, you're thinking the nucleus of a cell, unless you've been in 2402. In this case, we're talking about nuclei that are located in the brainstem, at the very top of that. Okay? So it's not talking about like the nucleus of one cell. It's talking about you have what we call basal nuclei, and living organisms have basal nuclei, and that's what it's referencing. Okay? So this is the region of their brain that controls the development of their song. Does anybody know the importance of a bird's song? To attract mates and to communicate with their peers within their population, for sure. Yes. Okay? So birds learn their songs early in life. Who do they learn their songs from? Their parents. Okay? So it's, of course, what we call a critical period. We have issues with young birds who perhaps lose their parents, or they fall out of their nest, but they're taken up and cared for by something else. Like those, we see patterns, inconsistent patterns there. But in a totally natural relationship where you have the hatchling and the parent, we know that those hatchlings learn their song from their parents. It mentions here that the biochemistry and structure of the individual nerve cells. So biochemistry is talking about how like proteins, lipids, nucleic acid, those are those biomolecules that we learned in 1406. So nutrition plays a role in that. The way that your body is metabolizing plays a role in that. But now I'm talking about an individual nerve cell nuclei. So I just want you to see the difference in that. Specific nerve cells will stimulate specific cues or respond to specific cues. Birds will discriminate their songs within species by using the basal nuclei of their brain, not the nuclei of a cell. I just want to make sure that you understand the difference on those. So, if they learn their song early from their parents, and it's the song of their population, then within that territory, they can communicate with birds within that. What if a bird from another territory comes in? Are they able to recognize that? Yes. Why are they able to recognize it? They have a different song. They have a different pitch. And all of that, like, to me, it all sounds like birds just doing their thing. But I'm sure we sound that same way to them. Like, I know when I'm talking to someone in my family or somebody I know versus somebody I don't know. Okay? Now, hormones regulating those genes. So you have this same DNA throughout your entire life, but why is it that you change and develop differently throughout life? Why don't you just stay small? Hormones. And there's genes for hormones. And when those genes are turned on, guess what you're making? Proteins, and those proteins in that case are hormones. So when it's time for you to grow, guess what hormone you're going to create? Growth hormone. Yeah, it's growth hormone. That's it. You're going to create growth hormone. And as you're growing, your cells are going to respond differently because that hormone is in your blood. I've changed the environment of those cells, so they're going to act differently. They're going to behave differently. What are some things that change as you begin to age because of hormones? Your size, your weight, your voice, your fat deposition, the development of body hair, facial features squaring off of your face. If you're a male, broadening of your shoulders, axillary hair, so pubic hair, axillary hair under your armpits, all of that stuff starts to be activated just because a hormone has impacted a gene. So we've changed the environment, we changed the way that gene acts. And that environment is itself changed by a gene. So we notice that hormone levels change as animals mature. And I feel like I just explained that. Hormone levels affect the reproductive activity in many animals. What does that mean? Yes, when it's mating season, you know these organisms are louder, they're more aggressive, they're more assertive. In humans, if you were in 1406, I told you, you can smell when someone is ready to mate. And you don't know that that's what you smell, and it's kind of awkward, but humans release a scent about 24 to 48 hours before they ovulate. Females do, and males pick up on it like that. And so they don't know that they're not like, she's ovulating. They don't know that, but if they have a partner or someone that they're attracted to, they are more attracted to them during that time than other times because of that. So we respond to hormones. We know when it's time to mate. And when people are like, oh my gosh, we only had sex one time, I don't know how we got pregnant. You probably had sex as a result of the hormonal fluctuations. You were super attracted to one another. And guess what? She was ovulating. So now you have a kid. You only have to have sex one time to get pregnant. Just once. Okay? So hormones also control the neural development. As you continue to grow, you continue to experience things. You continue to get feedback from society. You continue to develop. In humans, I know for a fact, and it's similar in birds, but we have fine motor coordination. Our nerves develop from head to toe. What I mean by that is you don't come out able to control everything. Does anybody know what the very first thing a baby can control is? Not its hands. Breathing comes instinctively. What's the first thing that they can voluntarily control? And they don't talk. Your head. Your head. Whenever you're holding a brand new baby, what are they always like? Watch their head, watch their head. Because the muscles, the nerves haven't extended yet from the brain to the head muscle, the head muscles, the muscles of the neck that support the head. So we call it myelination, and that's a whole different lecture. But as those nerves begin to myelinate, the baby will start to gain control. So the first physical, voluntary thing that they can control is to lift their head. And does anybody know what comes next? The shoulders and the arms. They're like swinging at things. Okay? It continues to go until the myelination has gone all the way to the toes, and they can start to pull themselves up and try to support their body weight. And they have to do it over and over again to get those muscles acclimated. And then all of a sudden, they're like, hey, wait. Like if I just move, and I just did that, and then they start walking. This is also 100% why it takes males longer to potty train than females. Because the nerves that have to travel to the end of the penis are longer. Whereas for a female, they're not. And so it may take a male 2 or 3 more years to be able to control the sphincters that control the urine than it does a female. And that's 100% because of myelination. And I know that there's quite a few issues with child abuse and stuff like that, but there truly is a thing. It's a thing. Like we develop from head to toe. We get that control that way. And you're going to see that in most complex animals. Now, when we start talking about clams and stuff, it's not about clams, okay? So we don't have to worry about them supporting their neck or their body weight, anyways. But so we see that as they continue to develop, they're going to release hormones. We've already said that. They're neurologically going to begin to develop. And then when it says here, unless androgens are applied, androgens are hormones, sex hormones, okay? So sex hormones take things to a whole nother level. When sex hormones, so we have growth hormone, but sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen/progesterone, when those are applied, so growth hormone will help our muscles get bigger, our bones get bigger, we'll gain mass. But testosterone makes us do what? Develop like and estrogen makes us develop like a male and a female. And if I give estrogen to a male, guess what's going to happen? He's going to develop like a female. He's going to develop female characteristics. And what if I give testosterone to a female? Same thing. Same thing. So it mentions that we have a genetic code for hormones. We have a genetic code for testosterone. We have one for estrogen, depending on our sex. Okay? And as those genes are turned on, they change the behavior and the way that we act. And this will eventually stimulate sexual development, and it will be controlled hormonally. All right. So that's that section. Questions on that?